It was May 3, 2010, and Air Force photographer Staff Sergeant Stephen Doty had just returned to his forward operating base in Afghanistan after a morning mission when something caught his eye.
So from the time that we had it on the screen till the time it was starting to come in, you just knew something was wrong. It wasn't flying right, it wasn't flying straight, it was flying low. And at some point, you heard somebody yell, "It's going to crash, it's coming down." And I didn't really hesitate. I just kind of ran out, instinctively almost just out of curiosity, you know. But then it's just like your body just responds.
The FOB wasn't equipped to handle a flight emergency, but witnesses on the scene knew they had to act before the situation got worse.
Now you had engines running with hot exhaust in the vicinity of leaking aviation fuel. So we went from one hazard of just the spinning blades to the second hazard of the fuel. And it was at that point we realized what the cargo of the helo was, which were about 2,000 pounds of 120 millimeter high explosive mortars.
Sergeant Doty climbed inside the helicopter and tried to get the crew to shut everything down, but they were in shock and couldn't reach the switches. While helping the crew get to safety, he worked to kill the engines.
Really, it was just like a quick systems check. Like I knew what I needed to do was cut off fuel. At one point I even took my knife out and I tried to cut wires just to see if that would work. It was long enough to run that until I felt a pat on my shoulder, which was at the time, my public affairs officer saying, "Everybody's clear, you're good." And it just didn't seem logical to continue sitting in the aircraft while everybody's in there. So it's basically multitasking. You know, as long as there's still a guy they're trying to get out, I'll do the best I can to slow this thing down.
Once explosive ordnance disposal cleared the site, Sergeant Doty returned to the helicopter once again to try to shut it down. When nothing was working, he called his dad, retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel and helicopter pilot.
So he quickly told me the helicopter had crashed. They had pulled the crew members out. The helicopter was still running. He had tried to turn it off and it wouldn't turn off, and he wanted to know if I could tell him anything that would help. He said he had turned all the switches off in the cockpit, even though they weren't in English, because it was a Russian helicopter. He had had some flight training through Civil Air Patrol before he went in the military, and knew that in a cockpit all the switches are off in one direction and on in the other direction.
He continued his attempt to stop the engines until they eventually ran out of fuel and died on their own. Talk of putting Sergeant Doty in for the Soldier's Medal began right away, but after 4 years, Sergeant Doty had put it out of his mind, until a couple of weeks ago. Sergeant Doty's wife, Talia, wasn't surprised he was being honored for helping to save the lives of the 3 crew members, partially because it is common for him to be the first to lend a helping hand, but mostly because she witnessed the entire event.
It was very scary because my reaction was, whoa, this isn't right. Everybody should back away. We should get away from the scene. And, you know, there was a few couple that ran towards the helicopter, and it was just scary. Like, why did he have to do it? You know, there's so many other people. Why did he have to be the one? But after the fact, I was happy, because if it would have been, you know, any of us that was trapped in there, we'd have wanted somebody to pull us out.
The Soldier's Medal is awarded to any person.
Surrounded by people he loves and trusts, Staff Sergeant Doty finally has closure for the events of that day.
Very, very proud of him.
For the Air Force Broadcasting Service, I'm Senior Airman Renee Carberry.
By heroism, not involving actual conflict with an enemy.